don't try to find your own voice. And I'd say that because that is one of the pieces of advice that was passed on to me by Bill Parks. And he was 100% right, I think, that if you just study, become curious about the world, curious about everything, you will gravitate towards certain themes, certain ideas, certain ways of expressing things. Style or voice, I think, is nothing more than people's habitual mistakes. So if you just try to be a great artist, you try to be the best that you can be at the things that interest you, eventually your style will find you.
Welcome to the BoldBrush Show, where we believe that fortune favors the bold. Brush. My name is Laura Arango-Bear, and I'm your host. For those of you who are new to the podcast, we are a podcast that covers art marketing techniques and all sorts of business tips specifically to help artists learn to better sell their work. We interview artists at all stages of their careers, as well as others who are in careers tied to the art world in order to hear their advice and insights. On today's episode, we sat down with William Schneider, a realist painter and Renaissance man at heart, with a passion for painting, music, and experimentation to find out how things work. Bill tells us all about his beginnings as a touring musician, how he started a financial business, and then later became a full-time artist. He reminds us of the importance of working a day job you actually enjoy while you build up your art career, proper gallery etiquette so you always have a good relationship with your gallery, and why you shouldn't try to find your voice, and instead let it come on its own as you create more paintings. He also recounts the importance of being curious about other things outside of painting and art, because it may just tie in perfectly into your work. Finally, Bill tells us all about his upcoming demos at the International Association of Pastel Societies and at the Plein Air Convention. Welcome, Bill, to the BoldBrush Show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's a good day down here in Florida.
Oh,
I was just out biking. It's 82 degrees.
Oh, that's
and
very
sunny.
Warm.
Yes.
Yeah, and humid, of course.
Not like, is Norway super cold right now?
It is, yes. Yeah, I mean, we're getting a bit of a warmer. I say warmer, but it's maybe like low 40s, high 30s. But we're gonna get some more snow this week. Also because I'm in the Arctic, so yes, we it is very cold up here.
It's the land of my forebears.
Oh,
I'm mostly Norwegian,
awesome.
Although you wouldn't know that from my name.
No, I would think you're like German.
Yes, well, my great-grandfather immigrated from Norway, and he settled in Chicago in Germantown. And so he changed his name because he was surrounded by Schmids and Schneiders and, those kinds of names. And he didn't want to sound like he came from the old country. So he changed it from Christensen. My name should be Christensen.
So cool. Yeah, that's a very, very Norwegian last name.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow, that is so awesome. Well, I highly recommend coming over here, especially if you do plein air, because this is a beautiful country. Absolutely beautiful. But before we get sidetracked, do you mind telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay. I'm a full-time artist, and so I do that. I also have been a musician all my life. When I started out, as I mentioned before, when I first went to art school in the 60s at the University of Illinois, I was also playing in a rock band, and my band, the One-Eyed Jacks, got a record deal, and then all of a sudden we were playing 6 nights a week, 5 nights a week, and I could no longer get up for the life drawing classes, the drafting classes and such. And so I switched out of that and I got a degree in psychology with a business minor, but continued to play in bands. That's how I made my living till I was 35. And then my wife, who was the lead singer in the band at that time, became pregnant. And so we were going to take a year off and then put the band back together. But after the year, we decided we liked having money for a change. Because in the music business, like in the art business, you either make a lot of money or you don't make anything at all. And this middle range doesn't occur. And so, we were not making a lot. We were getting record deals. Each of the bands that I was in ended up on a different label. The One Eye Jacks was on Roulette. The next band was a band called Fat Water, and we were on MGM, which, interestingly enough, you can buy that album to today on iTunes. Even though it never sold, it probably sold more since, the 2000s than it ever sold in the 60s and 70s. But I digress. The third band was the one that my wife was in, and that was called Freeze. And we were on a small local label, Titanium Records. And our album sales were far from going titanium or platinum or gold or copper or brass or tin or whatever the scale goes down to. But in any case, so I've lost my train of thought here. What was the question? Oh, telling you about me. So that's what I did till I was 35. And then I got a straight job, and I was working as a salesperson, actually for our producer's father's company. And I was getting frustrated with that and answered an ad for a company called Kidder Peabody, which is a big brokerage house. And ended up going to work for them, and they trained me in finance. And I worked at Kidder until 1995. And at that time, I was running the Midwest pension consulting effort in Chicago with a partner, Bob DeMeo. And we set up a firm, DeMeo, Schneider and Associates, which is still in existence, has 5 offices now and 150 people, and is managing about $300 billion. But I left that. Well, let me back up. I started to go back to art school at the American Academy in the 90s. Because I actually saw a show at the Art Institute in Chicago. It was Monet in the 90s. I said, oh, this is cool. And I could do that. And so I went back to art school at that point. And first I went to the School of the Art Institute, which was totally steeped in abstract expressionism. So they couldn't teach me how to draw because the drawing teachers didn't know how to draw. And so I was frustrated with that. And then I talked to somebody, Dan Gerhardt actually, who said, oh, you ought to go to the American Academy and study with Bill Parks. And so I did that. And Bill Parks was amazing. I studied life drawing with him. I was in their Saturday program. So I went every Saturday for 8 years and did life drawing in the morning, and then I did painting in the afternoon. And then I took a bunch of workshops. So I wish that I had the academic drawing training that you have, but I wouldn't want the rigidity. So I guess things worked out the way they're supposed to.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that's true of life. Things work out the way they're supposed to. Maybe not the way you want them to, but the way they're supposed to.
Definitely.
So.
I completely agree with that. It's so funny how when you're looking forward at your life, you can't see that, right? You can only really notice that in hindsight, how your path,
Mm-hmm.
veered in a certain way for, gosh, a certain reason. Like maybe you had to experience something a certain way before something else happened so that you would have the right perspective, right? For whatever that
Mm-hmm.
may be. So it's very fascinating too that, you started painting, but then the bands happened, but then you went back to painting, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
what did you, was it just the Monet show, or did you always kind of hold a little bit of hope that you could go back to painting?
No, I continued to paint even during the band days, but if you call it that, I would do like 3 paintings a year.
Oh,
I
that's better
have
than
I
none.
had one that started out. It was, I don't know, about a 30 by 40, and it was started out with my ex-wife modeling, and then the shoulders were mine, and then the head was my wife's Karen. And so it was sort of this composite, but that's how long it took. I went through all these epochs in my life to even complete this one stupid painting, which wasn't any good because it was before I went back to art school anyway. So I think I threw it away.
Oh, I would have loved
Although
to
now
see
in
a picture of
retrospect,
that.
I wish I'd kept it because it had some history to it.
Yeah, yeah, but it was one of those experiences.
Yeah.
And it's nice to, to also think like you may have like maybe some of our listeners, for example, maybe they've had to, set their painting aside for a while for who knows whatever life reason, and then, they can still always pick it up anytime, go back into it and make a living, which is of course what the podcast is about. But before we get into that, do you find that in your work you explore very specific themes, or do you have like specific messages?
Um, I guess my key themes would be the mystery and the beauty of the world, first of all. And then secondly, the human condition with both the upside and the downside. I do some paintings that are kind of dark, and I do, not just visually dark, but emotionally dark. And I did one, let me back up. In Chicago, there is a place called the Palette and Chisel, which is a 130-year-old art club. And they have models 7 days a week and usually 6 hours a day. And you pay a membership fee and you have access to these models all the time. So anyway, I would go there many days a week. And one time we had a model, and for whatever reason, at one point in the session, different emotions go on the models' faces, and they sort of revert back to various things. And people usually just paint sort of the resting face, which is the most uninteresting. But at one point, she had this look of extreme angst. And I said, I'm going to capture that. And I had studied a book by, what's his name? Francis something. Anyway, it was about expressions and the different muscles that cause the different expressions. And so I gave her the brow of distress with the inner corners moving up, and then that started getting a narrative going in my mind of, I was just reading about the persecution of Christians in North Africa and the Middle East. And so that's kind of a dark painting, persecuted, and it was a pastel. It's just a head study, but in the background, I put a couple of red splotches on the background wall and sprayed them with acetone so they dripped down, and it looked like bullet holes, bloody bullet holes in the wall of this distressed woman. She was an African American woman. It's called Persecuted, so we can find that image someplace.
Yeah.
And but anyway, so to circle back, that's kind of the human condition. Sometimes they're, happy, joyful pictures. Sometimes they're dark, unhappy pictures.
Yeah.
But, I'm interested in people. I find people more interesting than just landscapes or still life or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's mostly what I do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I work in oil and
considering-
pastel, primarily.
Yes.
Oil, pastel, and charcoal, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's who I am and what I do.
Yeah.
Is that enough background? I've had 3 careers. Music, music and art sandwiched, the 2 non-money making careers, sandwiching the one. If you want to make money, don't go into art, people. Go into finance. It's easiest to make money if you're closest to the heart of money. Go to New York, work for a hedge fund.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean that is the brutal truth of money making. But at the same time, I feel like many people who get into creative careers, they do it because they love it. And
Exactly.
if you paint out of love, then do it. And eventually, hopefully, you can make money from it.
Yeah.
But if you love money, then you might as well just dive into that instead. Uh,
Right.
yeah.
Don't go into art to get rich.
No,
Some people do.
does.
Some people get rich, but
Yes.
that's not the norm. It's like some of the rock musicians get rich.
Exactly.
99% do not. You're going from gig to gig. And one time we were playing and we were on our way to, I think, Lincoln, Nebraska. And it was the middle of the night because we played one place, then the road crew had packed up. We had stayed at the hotel for a while, and then we got in the car and are driving through the middle of the night, and far in the distance we see this flame on the horizon, and we're driving closer and closer to it, and there's a truck that's on fire, and that's our truck with our equipment.
Oh no.
So this is, and the equipment was okay. It was the front of the truck that was in flames, but this is a band road experience.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I mean, it's already expensive enough to drive out there. I can only imagine, losing the truck too. Oh,
yeah. Or we got a gig in Toronto one time, and we thought, oh, this is great. This is a well-paying gig. So we drove up to Toronto, and the first thing we discovered was that we had to post a bond when we were bringing our equipment into Canada, because they wanted to make sure that we weren't bringing in a used band equipment held together by gaffer tape and gaffer tape and bobby pins. But we were going to sell it in Canada, so we had to post a bond, which cost us a couple $100. Then when we got paid, it suddenly dawned upon us that our contract was in dollars Canadian, not dollars US.
oh no.
And so what we thought was a well-paying gig turned out not to be so well-paying. And the
Yeah.
club was a nightclub at night, but by day it was a strip club. And so normally, you'd rehearse during the afternoon and work out new songs and stuff. And we're there trying to rehearse, and the strippers trying to do their thing. And it was a funky gig.
Yeah, wow. That's a wild life.
Yeah.
That's very
Well,
funny.
it sounds better in the telling than it did necessarily in the living.
Yeah, I
But
mean, yeah, going through it is definitely much different than hearing about it because you can definitely laugh about it now. But yeah, I find it makes sense that you would have an interest in, the human condition and people, considering you studied psychology, alongside, your other careers. Um, because of course, the study of psychology is in itself the study of people and their minds and how
mhm.
they work. So it's very fitting. It's very fitting, that you would prefer the portrait and the human figure as, your way of expressing your themes and your ideas and your messages. So yeah, and I like that you mentioned the accepting both the good and the bad, right? The light and the dark. Because you can't live your whole life ignoring one side of the image, right? And you can't have a complete image without the lights
Right.
and shadows. So it's very fitting as well. Um, but I'm guessing that you must have taken time to also find your own voice, right? It was very much, it seems like it was very much like an aha moment or slowly over time from painting, right? Do you have any advice for someone who's trying to find their own voice?
Yes. Don't try to find your own voice. And I'd say that because that is one of the pieces of advice that was passed on to me by Bill Parks.
Oh,
And he was 100% right, I think, that if you just um, study, become curious about the world, curious about everything, you will gravitate towards certain themes, certain ideas, certain ways of expressing things. Style or voice, I think, is nothing more than people's habitual mistakes. In other words, if somebody, okay, Modigliani, making these elongated, or El Greco, making these elongated figures, maybe he had an issue with proportion, but it became a style,
mhm.
and because in art, you cannot paint what we see. What we see is light rays hitting the object, bouncing off the object, going into our retina, being projected upside down on nerve endings in our eyeballs in the back of them, and going into the brain and being interpreted as whatever. But in that process, every step of it, you're losing information. And so the information is filtered through our own verbal constructs and prejudices. I mean, human beings, including artists, talk to themselves incessantly we never shut up, you know? And so the internal dialogue, we can either try to harness it and use it, or we can fall victim to it. And what I mean by that is, a lot of my students, will express their internal dialogue. They'll make it external, and it's kind of, oh, I started too late. I'll never be any good. I just don't get this temperature business. I don't understand this. Maybe I should take up golf. I was better at golf, but not really that good. I was like a 19 handicap, and they're saying all of these things. A useful dialogue would be, okay, I don't like this. What don't I like? Is it too light? Is it too dark? Is it too warm? Is it too cool? Is it too sharp? Is it too soft? Is it too green or is it too gray? If you ask yourself sort of these paired questions, then you can come up with useful answers. And to circle back to style, Bill Parks told me, do not try to find your own style. And then in my own research, I ran across a little, I don't remember if it was an excerpt from a letter or somebody recording advice he received from John Singer Sargent, about, I want to become a great portrait artist. And Sargent told him, no, don't try to become a great portrait artist. Try to become a great artist, and then you can do portraits. And that's what Sargent did, obvious by his body of work throughout time. And, so if you just try to be a great artist, you try to be the best that you can be at the things that interest you, eventually your style will find you. See, I don't think I have a style particularly, but then I've had people say, oh, I recognized your painting right off the bat. Really? But I'm just trying to be honest to the scene that's in front of me as filtered through my own internal movie. Generally, like the anecdote I told you about the persecuted woman, if my best paintings are paintings where it's not model sitting in chair, it's Romeo sitting at her mirror pining from her lost love. It's like a movie. And so then I start illustrating that movie. It's that internal dialogue. And that's what I circle back to, that people, you're going to talk to yourself anyway, might as well say something that's useful.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So,
definitely, having that narrative side, right? Which I feel like illustration has been so great at, maintaining that narrative side of painting, whether it's narrative through the color, through the scene, through the emotion of the sitter, or, the subject. Um, I feel like, that's so important, especially for someone who wants to be a realist painter who creates narrative painting, to try to, I guess, when they're faced with a sitter, kind of like how you were, catching a specific moment and then making up some story about it helps really
mhm.
guide the painting into a much more specific direction than just, some really pretty painting of a person, right? There's more, and it creates a
Yeah.
much more interesting image, for sure.
Even if the viewer doesn't know what you were thinking about, they know that there's something going on. There's an
Yes.
element, and they may impose a completely different narrative than the one that the artist had, but it doesn't matter. There's something happening that's more than model sitting in chair.
Hmm.
There's a great book, we talked about this a little bit before,
Yeah.
Creative Illustration, and Andrew Loomis was not trying to teach, quote unquote, artistes. He was trying to teach uh, the poor, lowly illustrators how to be good illustrators, and talked about, what is carrying the story forward? Is it the clothing? Is it the lighting? Is it the brush treatment? Is it a combination? It's probably a combination. Where are you placing the figures? What what is your vantage point? Are you above at the eye level or below the eye level? And they create different kinds of images. If you're looking up at something, that creates automatically a feeling of, I don't know, majesty or importance or whatever. If you're looking down on them, that's a different thing. So you have all of these tools at your disposal as an artist, and you choose which tool based on what is of interest to you. Here's what doesn't work: trying to paint like something you think somebody will like. And I know that because I've tried to do that. I've entered competitions and I thought, who's the juror? Oh, they like these things. And then those are not my successful paintings. And I quit doing that long ago. I tell my students that, don't try to paint what you think will sell. If you paint what you love, there are 8 billion people on Earth. Half of them are just trying to live till tomorrow. So that's 4 billion. Take those out because they're not worried about art. But of the 4 billion that are left, that's 4 billion people that have some interest in art. And if it's only 10%, what is that, 400 million? That's a lot of people. There's going to be somebody that will like the same things you like. And they will find what you do inordinately interesting, and they will be your fans. And all you have to do is keep painting and put your work out there, and hopefully people will discover you while you're still alive. As opposed to being the Van Gogh, which should be pronounced Van Gogh, where he didn't find his audience till after he was dead. But there was still an audience for his work, and apparently it's a big audience. So
it is. Yeah,
So
definitely.
don't try to paint what you think others will like or what will get you into a specific gallery, because that never works.
No, and also if you do get into that gallery with this disingenuous work, you're gonna end up hating it. You're gonna end up hating
Yeah,
every minute
yeah.
of it. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, but also, I was really curious to know, since you've had quite a few shifts in your direction, what was it like for you to go, and finally become a full-time artist? When did you finally, say, okay, I quit my day job, I'm doing this full time?
Um, I quit my day job. Well, let me put it this way. With my finance business, I got to a point where it was okay. I have enough money that will satisfy all our needs. We're not extravagant buyers of stuff. The thing that I spend the most money on is other artists. So I buy artwork. I collect artwork. Um, I'm driving a 2016 Honda Pilot. I had a Mercedes 560 SL, and that satisfied my midlife crisis car. And then the next step up would be to buy a Bentley, and I'm not going to spend $300,000 to buy a Bentley. So cars don't do it.
Mhm.
Golf memberships don't do it. Big fancy houses don't do it.
Yeah.
Art does it. And so, anyway, at that point, it's like, okay, so why do I want to not do what I want to do so that I can pile up lots of money, give it to my kids, then they will retire and do what they want to do.
Yeah.
I'm skipping the middleman. I'm going to retire and do what I want to do. I talked with my old partner at one point, and he said, wow, you seem like you're being pretty successful at this art thing. Do you mind if I ask you what you make? And I threw out a number. He said, is that per week? I said, no, that's per year. He's warped by still being in that business. And, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. So you
So
basically had like a nest egg, which is good.
yeah. So when did I start doing it full time? Probably 2006 was when I cut the cord on everything else. And maybe it was a little bit later than that. I'd have to go back and retrace my steps. My life is, I remember my life by different events.
Hmm.
Which of my kids was born when was the first grandkid born? When was,
Yeah.
and oh, by the way, those are the important things.
Yes.
And so I
Definitely.
have to remember business things in relation to those other things.
Right.
But so anyway, I've been doing this full time for a while,
Yeah.
and uh, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I love to talk about art, so I love to teach. Although my wife has Parkinson's, so I can't be on the art school circuit anymore. And so I teach 2 workshops a year, one near my house in Florida and one in Illinois, because then I don't have to leave her alone.
Yeah.
And we have caregivers that come in, but you know.
Ah.
So, but I love art. I love to talk about art. I view myself as a perpetual student.
Hmm.
And so I keep exploring different different elements.
Yes.
And then uh, as I explore them, then I want to pass them on to other people. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I just found out this cool thing, and here's what it is.
Yeah,
So,
it's exciting. It's like, like a mad scientist. At BoldBrush, we inspire artists to inspire the world because creating art creates magic, and the world is currently in desperate need of magic. BoldBrush provides artists with free art marketing, creativity, and business ideas and information. This show is an example. We also offer written resources, articles, and a free monthly art contest open to all visual artists. We believe that fortune favors the bold brush. And if you believe that too, sign up completely free at boldbrushshow.com. That's BoldBrush show.com. The BoldBrush Show is sponsored by Faso. Now more than ever, it's crucial to have a website when you're an artist, especially if you want to be a professional in your career. Thankfully, with our special link, faso.com/podcast, you can make that come true and also get over 50% off your first year on your artist website. Yes, that's basically the price of 12 lattes in 1 year, which I think is a really great deal considering that you get sleek and beautiful website templates that are also mobile friendly, e commerce, print on demand in certain countries, as well as access to our marketing center that has our brand new art marketing calendar. And the art marketing calendar is something that you won't get with our competitor. The art marketing calendar gives you day by day, step by step guides on what you should be doing today, right now, in order to get your artwork out there and seen by the right eyes so that you can make more sales this year. So, if you want to change your life and actually meet your sales goal this year, then start now by going to our special link, faso.com/podcast. That's FASO.com/podcast. I feel like painting is so much like there's so much to it that's very similar to the scientific method, right? Because you have something set before you and you have a hypothesis of how to go about, recreating it in a
mhm,
way that either does justice to it or, maybe enhances parts of it. Because it's usually what we're doing. We're not really copying reality because that's impossible, as you've already
right?
mentioned. So
Yeah,
we might as well do something more interesting with it, more dreamlike, more
yeah.
something more. So yeah. And then I love that you mentioned, the side of painting and being an artist that is actually quite pleasant, which is you get time to be with the people you love. You get time to, set aside time. Okay, I have my painting time, but I can still remain home and I can still be with my kids, my grandkids, my wife, my husband, or
Hmm.
whomever. So I feel like that's one of the really nice liberating sides of painting. Because I don't know, if I'm gonna have a daily grind of 8 hours a day, I'd rather be able to do it surrounded by the people I love. And not, that dedicate, most of my day to I don't know, a business I don't even care about, right? Um,
Yeah.
that's the interesting side about painting and being an artist. It's a little bit selfish, but I think it's a much more pleasant life than a typical
Well,
9 to 5.
I agree. Although I will say this:
Mhm,
if people are working a job they don't like, quit the damn job and find a job you do like. I never worked at anything I didn't like,
mhm.
either as a musician or in finance. that I was solving problems and doing things that were interesting, and I just got paid better for it. But it was still interesting stuff. And one of the things that made my finance firm so successful was we figured out a solution to a problem of, okay, how do you allocate assets? Stocks, bonds, cash, private equity, all of this stuff. How do you figure out optimal mixes of that stuff? Well, in 1952, a guy named Harry Markowitz developed an understanding using the first computing power that, hey, these markets are log normal distributions. And so I can apply these mathematical tools to figure out at each risk level an optimal portfolio. And everybody started using that with one flaw. The three inputs for that model are expected return, correlation coefficients between the assets, and volatility or standard deviation. And the only problem with that model is you have to do these estimates going forward, and one thing you know is you're going to be wrong on all three. And so we said, well, wait a minute, what if we didn't do it once and praying to God that we had the right estimates? What if we just ran it 500 times and squashed all of those different outputs together? And so we ended up creating a model that was much more efficient. And then fortunately, we lived in a time where there were a couple of major market dislocations. And so in 2007 and 2008, the markets just got decimated. People were worried that the entire capitalist system was going to crater and everything else. And people that had been using our model didn't get hurt or didn't get hurt as badly because they were much more evenly distributed rather than saying, oh, we think that small cap stocks and large cap stocks are going to outperform, so you're going to be 72% in those. Well, except for that time.
Yeah.
And so that worked to our benefit. And then we also had developed a rebalancing strategy. And so in 2008 and 2009, especially particularly 2009, we were having people rebalance back into equities, and they're saying, we don't want to do it. It's going to, I saw on TV, it's going to go down another 60% from here. I said, you've been doing this for 10 years with us. The model is the model. You got to follow it. And they did. And then, of course, the markets turned around and went up, and they all made enormous amounts of money. And so, as a result, we got many, many clients, university endowments and hospitals and pension funds, state pension funds, and all of that. So it worked out. But anyway, I've gone too long on that stuff. But it was all interesting stuff. And so if you're doing a job that you hate and trying to do your art on the side, step one, give up the job you hate and find a job you like. So at least you're never suffering to get to the thing you like. That's my advice.
Yeah, and it also helps with getting that energy and motivation to even do it, because if you're working a job that's unfulfilling, oftentimes it can be really demotivating, and it can be really honestly depressing, because you just end up, I don't know, you end up just feeling like you wake up every morning wondering, what the hell am I doing? Uh, but you mentioned something that I find interesting, which is obviously in that job that you had before, you were dealing a lot with clients. Do you find that the way that you handled those clients is very similar to the way that you handle clients who buy art and are your collectors?
Not so much. Because with the galleries, a lot of times they sort of hoard the collectors. They don't want to tell you who's buying your paintings because they don't want people to go around them.
Mm-hmm.
The gallery model, you would think that galleries would make a fortune because they don't pay for their inventory. It's all in consignment. They're collecting 40-50% of the value of that consignment. So all they pay for is their staff, their electricity, and their rent. How can they not make money hand over fist? But Apparently they don't, because a lot of them go belly up. So anyway, but they tend to want to hoard their collectors because they don't want people to go around them.
Right.
I have galleries that I've worked with for a number of years, and they know that if somebody is one of their clients and comes to me through them, I'm not going to try to poach them. And to the point that even if the client, sees my work on the internet or through social media, and I will talk to them and say, well, how did you hear about me? Oh, I've got 2 of your paintings. I bought them from Reinert Fine Art in Charleston. I thought, oh, well, that's great. You know what? You should talk to Jason at Reinert, and I don't handle the negotiations.
Yeah.
But if you're a return collector, that's a good thing, and maybe he'll give you a discount. Why don't you call him? Or I'll have him call you. And so I don't try to do end runs around my galleries. But in the pension business, I was going out and meeting with potential clients all the time. And I would speak at conferences and, use my performance background to, win hearts and minds, hopefully. But, so there was a level of engagement with the ultimate purchasers. And, you just can't do that in the art business because there's, going back to the 8 billion people, I can't physically call on 4 billion of them to find the 400 million that might like my work. Not if I'm going to spend my time producing the work. That's the interesting part for me, anyway. So I leave that to the galleries for the most part.
Yeah.
And I know some artists try to make a business out of selling off of their website. I don't really do that too much. If I'm going to be in the gallery business, screw that. I'll be in the finance business. I don't want to be in that business. I don't want to be in any business but the business I'm in, which is producing artwork.
Right.
And producing music. I still do that. So.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, you can go on YouTube and go to the Schneider Ross Band, ROSS. Nice. We've got probably, 25 videos up.
Oh, well, I'll include it in the links in the show notes so people can go check it out. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll send. We record under the Schneider Ross Band, under the Jamie Rose Schneider music. That's my daughter. She sings lead on a number of things. And under Michelangelo Badio, or music featuring Michelangelo Badio, because he does his own thing too. He's currently touring. In fact, he might be in Norway for all I know. He's in Europe someplace right now with a band that he plays with now. But so my efforts. I'm a studio musician as opposed to a touring musician now.
It's much more comfortable, and especially as a painter, it's also much more comfortable. But
Yes.
The reason I asked about the collectors is also because I understand that there is gallery etiquette, right? You should never ever sell to a collector that's been through a gallery behind the gallery's back, because then it's a breach of trust.
Right.
Also because I have heard maybe a collector could go up to the artist and be like, "Hey, if I just buy directly from you, then I won't be paying like the full price at the gallery. I'll just give you your chunk." Which is, again, that's really fishy, and you should never do that. Because once the gallery finds out, it's over.
Yeah, well,
they're gonna be very
don't
mad.
want to compete on price anyway. And artists, I know how they think. They think, oh, the gallery sells my work for $3,000, but I only get 1,500 because they charge 50% commission. If I sell it directly, I could sell it for 2,000. I'm still making more. Wrong. If somebody could pay 2,000 for a painting that's being sold for 3, why would they buy the 3,000? So you've just destroyed your own pricing. It's like as if Coca-Cola would undercut the grocery stores. If you buy directly from us, a 6-pack of Coke is 82 cents.
Yeah.
Well, then the grocery stores are going to quit carrying them. And then they've just lowered their pricing. Why would you do that?
Yeah, that's another cardinal sin. It's you never lower your prices if they've gone to a certain level as an artist because it just doesn't work that way. Maybe the only
Yeah,
time you do that is in the beginning when you don't know what to price your work and maybe you went a little too high too soon. I think that's when you should maybe, calm down. Um, but yeah, I completely agree, maintaining that gallery etiquette, especially if you're going to work with a gallery because of course our listeners, some of them are maybe interested in working with galleries and maybe they're just interested in selling online and both ways work. Obviously one takes more work than the other in the sense that if you're doing it on your own, you have to do the shipping, the marketing, the finding the collectors yourself, which can oftentimes be a little bit more complicated because it's very hard to, like you said, you can't just get these 8 billion people and then 4 billion and try to find like the collectors inside of that. That's an insane amount of people. So that's usually what the gallery pays you in, right? Which is they have a list of collectors that they
right.
discuss, sales with. But like you said, they do go belly up, and oftentimes I find that it's because the gallerists don't sell well, or they just don't try to sell. Which again,
They don't treat it
it's a
like a
balance.
business either. Uh,
Exactly.
I would say, even if an artist is trying to sell themselves,
Mhm.
or if you're working with a gallery, the things that I do to contact my clientele, I publish a blog. I try to do it monthly, but I do a newsletter and I have a blog in my newsletter, and that I do monthly. And then I have another more advanced blog that's just on my website. But I I try to use that as a way to reach followers to sort of broadcast uh, my work to the masses. And so BoldBrush is integral to that
Yeah.
on my part. Bazo helps me keep my nose to the grindstone in terms of staying in front of people and publishing work that gets seen. And then collectors, even collectors that are normally going to galleries, will see the work and then they'll excuse me, contact me, and then I'll turn them on to the gallery. But the work still gets sold. I've had a couple pieces in the past 3 weeks where that's been the case, where somebody contacted me because, oh, I saw this piece of work, in an Instagram feed, and is it still available? Yes, it is. How did you hear about me? Well, I bought several of your pieces at the Reinert Gallery. Oh, great. Talk to Jason. The story that I told before. That was a real story. And the guy ended up buying that piece. It hadn't even gone to the gallery. It was still sitting in my studio, and I shipped it straight to the client. And, the gallery ended up getting a commission on that because it was their clientele.
Right.
And I guess the advantage that I have that maybe a lot of artists don't have is I don't do this for the money. Like I said, if I was doing it for the money, I would do something that made lots of money,
Yeah.
not small amounts of money. And I do, by artist standards, I'm doing pretty well.
Mhm.
By other standards, no. It's like, somebody said, oh, if I could be a millionaire, I'd be rich. No, you wouldn't. You'd be upper middle class. I'm sorry, millionaires are not rich. You'll notice that the
Anymore.
politicians have quit ranting about the millionaires. They've upscaled to the billionaires. Now
Mhm.
they're targeting the billionaires as the evil 1% that don't pay their fair share. But it's because so many of the politicians have now become millionaires on their own by hook or by crook, mostly
Mhm.
by crook. But anyway,
Yeah, it does make it a lot easier to get things done when you actually enjoy doing it, right? Like when you're doing it for the joy of the creation of these things and putting your work out there like you just said, putting it on social media, someone sees it and they say, "Oh my gosh, I want this." I think that's like one of the best parts of, the internet today. You get so many opportunities in so many places to get eyes on your work. Whereas, if it before it just sitting at home, it would be very, very hard to do that without a gallery. Which is
Yeah.
again, I think, why there's like this big, I guess, almost symbiosis between galleries and social media these days. Um, but I did want to ask you, what has been for you the most lucrative approach you've taken to sell your work, either online or offline?
The word lucrative doesn't come
Yeah.
to mind when I think of selling work. Uh, I,
Oh.
you know, I have chosen, and it's been very successful for me to work with the galleries.
Hmm.
You know, when I was teaching on the workshop circuit, I would sell head studies to my students.
Hmm.
You know, and so that was one way that I could get the stuff out of my studio and into somebody else's hands to worry
Yeah.
about. Um, but for the more major works, and I just let the galleries deal with that. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm. Yeah.
now, and I give away paintings and I
Oh,
donate paintings.
nice.
You know, um, and I burn paintings.
Oh, you gotta do what you gotta do.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I love experimentation and I
Mm.
love learning about things. And so I do, to this day, I copy a masterwork at least once a month. And maybe
Love
it's
that.
just part of it, to learn, okay, how did Nikolai Fashion treat this eye?
Mm.
How did he fragment it so and still have it read as an eye? How much can you get away with? And so I'd copy some of these things. Or, how did Carolyn Anderson have these pathways between different parts of the painting so that it stays open rather than closed? We were talking about academic art. Part of what makes academic art at its worst so uninteresting is that it's all closed.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
agree.
you can study the the treatment of the deltoid and admire that. And then you can look down and see how they dealt with the elbow, and you can look at all these different parts, but each part is it's not an open system that you can just travel through and discover things. And I also find that the more spelled out, this is for me, the more
Mhm.
spelled out the representation is, the less interesting it is.
Of course.
Part of what I try to do is figure out how far can I go with this and still have it read. I'm a representational artist. I'm not a pure abstract artist, which, by the way, the pure abstract artists are the least abstract of all because their painting looks exactly like what it is, which is paint on canvas. Doesn't look like anything else, doesn't create the illusion of anything else. It looks like paint on canvas, and it is paint on canvas.
Right.
Very concrete.
That's mind blowing.
The the most abstract artists are the ones that create the illusion of three-dimensionality and emotion and narrative on a two-dimensional surface armed with sticks with hairs on the ends and powdered pigment mixed with oil.
Mm,
That's pretty abstract.
it is. Yeah.
And so, anyway.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There is, especially Fetchin is so good at this. The sense that things aren't really what we think they are, right? There's so much when we look at an object in front of us. We have so many, like you said earlier, preconceived notions about that object, right? You see like
Mhm.
a red ball, you say, okay, it's a red ball, right? But there's a lot more nuance to that. There's like, if you just accept it, right? Based on your preconceived notions, you try to paint that red ball, it won't look that great. But if you
No.
try to see it by discarding those preconceived notions and you look at it and you really examine it also within its surrounding and how it interacts, because color is so complex, it's very dependent on what's surrounding it, that maybe that red ball could look even more alive, as you were saying, by including some more of that environment, that passage of here and there, which if you're just perfectly copying reality, I would say that that's like akin to reading a book that is a very boring scientific book on a topic, right? It's a very detailed, like scientific sort of exploration of something. Whereas, when you try to paint something beyond those preconceived notions, it's much more like a poem or much more like a great
Yes.
literary novel instead of just telling you how things are.
You want a poem instead of a police report.
It's great. Yeah,
And
exactly.
I'd like
Oh
to
my
lay
god.
claim to inventing that, but I didn't. I heard that from somebody,
Oh my
maybe
god.
Carolyn or someone.
Yes, probably Carolyn. I love her. She's wonderful. She's wonderful. But that's hilarious. That's and it's very true. And of course, as painters, we are, we're in the same category as writers and poets. We're in the same,
Yes,
in the same sort of span of also like even actors who are portraying something beyond what it is, right? It's like the archetype that has been romanticized into a different level than just, oh, Larry, our neighbor who's over there mowing his lawn, right? They there's a way to romanticize it in a much more interesting way, which is why we go to the
yes,
movies.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're in the business of showing people what is interesting that they never pay attention to. And, part of that is the human condition.
Mhm.
Uh, when, you know, I always tell my students, you must become as little children to enter the kingdom of heaven.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is, if you think of the way an infant sees the world, it doesn't see, it sees this moving mosaic of shapes and values and colors. And then it learns over time that there's this recurring pattern of shapes, values, and colors that when it's distressed, this pattern comes and changes its diaper or gives it food or burps it or whatever, just holds it. And after a while, it learns a name for that and it calls it mom. And then it starts to learn names for other things. Where's your nose, touch mommy's nose, where's your ear? And so at about the age of 1.5, we start to string them together and make sentences. No nap, little short sentences, more food, whatever. Uh, and the problem for artists is that once the verbalization machine starts at a 1.5 years, it never shuts up. And then we just talk to ourselves all the time. And so we can't, people always say, paint what you see. But what people do is they look at something and what am I seeing? I'm seeing a red ball. It's a red ball. I know it's red. And so it must all be red. And some parts of it are dark because I learned about value to make shadow shape. So I'm going to make it a darker red. Well, is it a red ball under a warm light or a cool light? Do you have two light sources? What if it weren't red?
Yeah.
What if it were violet? If it's under a blue light, maybe it's violet, but you still perceive it as red because you're under that cool light too.
Mhm.
What if, so our perception is filtered through all of this verbal gobbledygook that's going on that we can't shut off.
Yeah.
And so art and music are basically language systems to show people something that their language system has shut out. Because the problem is, once we start with all of these sentences, we no longer pay attention to the real world and pay attention to what's in our heads, which is very efficient for processing information.
Yeah.
You can manipulate these verbal symbols much more quickly than you can actually walk across the veldt to see if that's a lion in the bush or not, which probably wasn't a successful exercise anyway. But that's great for manipulating abstractions of large amounts of data, but it's terrible for showing somebody else the beauty of a sunset.
Exactly.
I guess you could do modern art and you could have a black canvas and with a white letter that said sunset and call it sunset
Yeah.
and then have an explanation of why it was violating the paternalistic hierarchy of previous whatever, you'd have to come up with a bunch of extensive verbalization to explain that to other people who couldn't tell what from what you were
Yeah.
painted. But in any
That
case,
reminds me. Yeah. It reminds me of this is not a pipe, and it's like the
yeah,
pipe. Yeah,
right.
exactly. But yeah, it's very true, there's a big difference. I mean, from the one hand, if we did take in every single part of information without those preconceived notions, like you were just saying, we would go crazy. We would go crazy because we'd be overstimulated by having to take in all of this information at once.
It'd
But
be
it was
like
so,
being on acid all the time.
yeah, exactly. But then,
Hard to get anything
if
done.
it's it's impossible. But then when you're an artist or a painter or a creator of images, especially interesting images where you're trying to reflect something that's beyond, these preconceived notions, then you definitely have to shut off that side of you that is
Hmm.
telling you what is in front of you. You really have to investigate things and like at its foundation, of course, it's you have to relearn how to see something and see it for what it is rather than what you think it is.
You have to
Which
you have to see like an infant.
exactly, like you just said. But yeah, do you have any advice for someone who's looking to become a full-time artist?
Don't do it. There's too many out there already. No, that's. Uh, I would say, you know, you have to figure out how to make money from it, or how to have money that so you don't need to make it.
Yeah.
So that is sort of trial and error. The traditional way for a fine artist was to get into a gallery and have the gallery do the work of connecting with buyers. Um, if you're not at that state, a lot of people go into other art related fields, which I never perceived the difference. Somebody who is an illustrator or doing storyboards or whatever didn't think of themselves as artists. I have several friends who do that. And I said, but you're doing art all the time. Yeah, but I'm doing somebody else's stuff. Well, that's true, but you're still, you have your hand and a brush in your hand, or now a stylus or whatever.
Mhm.
So, but you have to find some way to make that work financially. I would say this: uh, if you work on your craft relentlessly, meaning become so good that the world can't ignore you. And then the question is, what is good? And good is at expressing what interests you and what looks good to you. And and the corollary to that is, and don't settle for, well, it looks kind of crappy, but that's as good as I can do, so I'm happy with it. No, that's not. That didn't look good to you. You got to develop the drawing skills, the rendering, the ability. There's basically 5 buckets that all art falls into for information, and there's shape, which is the drawing, which is mostly proportion. So
Mhm.
if you're going to be a representational artist, do not settle for proportions that are off, because it won't work. That's the one thing that non-artists can judge and are confident they can judge. If the head's too small relative to the torso, no amount of verbal whatever is going to make it look right, and they won't buy it. So, but anyway, you've got the 5 buckets are shape, value, color temperature relationships, edge, and composition. And I include in composition narrative and storytelling and all of that. But those are the 5 buckets. If somebody can ever tell me a 6th bucket, I'll explore that one, but I haven't had anybody be able to break it down. So those are the 5 areas, and just attack an area and get so good at it that people can't find fault with it. And, you know, uh, and that doesn't mean avoiding it. Bill Parks used to tell a story about, he had a student that didn't like hands. Hands are complex. In fact, I had a video out about heads and hands. It's published by Streamline or PaintTube TV. But in any case, the head basically has two bones. There's more than that, but they're all fused. So you've got the upper part and the mandible. That's it. 27 bones in the hand, and the tendons, are very visible. The musculature, there's a lot to it. So anyway, this guy avoided doing hands, and he figured out he'd always put himself in a position where he didn't have to draw hands, and he could disguise it. And he, as Bill Parks tells the story, he got a gig with an advertising agency, and the first thing he had to do was illustrate some gloves.
Oh no.
Yeah, and so anyway, my point being, attack those 5 buckets. My friend Dan Gerhardt has a great slogan which I borrow and repeat incessantly, and that is attack your weakness. Don't avoid your weakness, attack it. Whatever it is, if you're having trouble seeing color temperature relationships, work on temperature. And there's things you can do to do that. If you're having difficulty in seeing edges, make yourself squint. And do it to the point when you can't control it anymore. When you're out with your spouse and your spouse says, "Stop squinting at the waitress." You say, "I wasn't squinting." You say, "Yes, you were. You always do that." Then you'll know that you're squinting enough. Simplify the edges and see the hierarchy. What is the sharpest edge, the second sharpest, the firm edge, the soft edge, the completely lost edge. And then you can put those in your paintings. So anyway, that would be my advice.
Great advice. And I like that you really dove right into, the craft of it, because so much of the success, right, is very much the art itself, right? You can market it 100 ways, but if the work isn't up to par, then it's going to be very hard to market it. Whereas when the work is good, it's something you're proud of, and something, that, as you're saying, I'm going to aim for the highest level that I can reach, then, that's a whole different playing field. And it definitely makes marketing a lot easier.
Yes.
Yes.
And I would add to that, if you end up painting only things with intent. Huang Ho said something once, which I have also stolen and repeat incessantly. If you make a decision in a painting, it's always right. You make a decision, it's always right. And why is that? It's because you decided, I'm going to make this shadow lean more towards the violet for some reason. Now, what doesn't work is if you weren't paying attention and it just sort of happened and you left it there. It doesn't look like it has intent. But I've observed that paintings where all parts of it look like that's exactly what the artist meant to put in there, and that's exactly why he made that stroke, and why this stroke has a soft edge and this stroke has a hard edge, and look at how it all assembles itself. Those are interesting paintings because it's like a Zen exercise. You're watching somebody apply paint in a Zen manner, and it's highly interesting. And if it's interesting, somebody will be interested enough to plunk down their hard-earned cash for it. So, painting with intent.
That is so, I think that really hits the vein of the creative act also, because life and the human condition is so much, there's so much outside of our control, but the things that we can control, that's, how we can guide ourselves in life. And it's so similar with painting, where you have to be intentional, and you putting together this image that is, in the end, something more. I don't know. It feels like I feel like it took me somewhere else when you said that. I was like, whoa. But that's
Yes.
brilliant. Yeah, that's excellent advice. Um, do you mind telling us if you have any upcoming shows or exhibitions, workshops?
Yeah, well, I mentioned I've got kind of off of the workshop circuit. However, I
Okay.
am demoing at the IAPS convention, which is June 11th through 16th. IAPS is the International Association of Pastel Societies. And every 2 years they have a convention in Albuquerque, and they have, it's several days of demos and workshops and whatnot. So that's June 11th through the 16th, and the Plein Air Convention and Expo is May 20th through the 24th. And the website, I'm reading my notes here.
Yeah.
If you go to www.pleinairconvention.com, there's still spaces for that. And if you go to www.iapspastel.org, I think there's still spaces for that one. So
I will
those
include
are
those
the two big
links.
things that, okay, good.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, of course. And then you also have some really awesome videos on PaintTube, right?
Yes, I hope they're awesome. It's
Well,
it's
they have
me.
great reviews.
Yes, well, that's nice.
Yeah.
It's me talking. You can see I have no problem talking, and I think about things.
Mm,
I'm curious. This would be another piece of advice to artists. Don't just focus on art. Be
mhm.
interested in everything, because there's all kinds of interesting stuff that will somehow magically tie into the art. You and I were talking about the Ramachandran book,
Yes.
which is written by a medical neuroscientist. But oh, by the way, it has great application to art and artists.
Yes.
And he also ties it to the evolutionary way that our brains came into being,
Mm,
and
mhm.
how some of the systems in the brains were repurposed towards making art.
Yeah.
You know, and he also deals with what is the meaning of intelligence and what does it mean to be human.
Yes.
Interesting stuff. So don't limit yourself to you know 4 ways to paint a tulip. There's there's more to the world than that. But yes, I
Absolutely.
do. To circle back to the videos, I think I have 8 videos out on PaintTube TV, and if you want to put a link in there, that would be
Yes, I
nice.
shall. Awesome. Yeah. And then for our listeners who are curious about the Ramachandran book, that is The Telltale Brain. It's excellent book. Excellent book. And I love that you say also, to be curious about other things because it's so true. They do circle back to painting in the most unexpected ways. I mean, I have found the most fascinating tie-ins to painting just from reading something completely different, whether it's
Hmm.
philosophy, history, I mean, recently I was reading Aristotle and I was like, wow, this ties into painting. But yeah, so that's great advice. Yeah.
Yes. And by the way, here's one that ties very directly into it. Um, Look at movies not as the movie, but as okay. In fact, it works best if you do it on a DVD or something and keep stopping it. If you look at the trilogy of the Rings, or
Oh,
actually any of Peter Jackson's movies, each frame of that is a painting.
it
Particularly
is.
you got the Fellowship of the Ring running through the scenery and the mountainside. You can stop at any place. You could paint that, and it would be an interesting painting. Um, so good cinematography. There is a book by a guy named, I think it's Glebus, on how to do storyboards for movies.
Oh.
And that was very interesting. I had to get past the fact that the storyboards are very cartoony at first,
Mhm.
but then his explanations of how these things work. I'll get you the name of that. You can put it in a link.
Yes.
Uh, But those are interesting things. I found them interesting, at least.
Oh, that
you
sounds
know,
fascinating.
and
Yeah.
and they do tie into art. All of your experience will ultimately tie into who you are, and who you are will ultimately tie into what interests you, and therefore your art.
Yes. Definitely. It is a holistic thing. It's not separate for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Well, Thank you so much. Where can people find more of your work?
I'm in a number of galleries. The Reinert Gallery of Fine Art in Charleston, McBride Gallery in Annapolis, Alum Gallery West in Phillipsburg, Montana, New Masters Gallery in Carmel. Basically, those four.
Great. And your website?
Is www.schneiderart.com, and you can sign up for my newsletter where I talk about these varied subjects once a month, and I have a blog on that website. So,
Yes. Awesome. Well, I'll, of course, include all of the links in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much, Bill, for joining us on the podcast.
well, thank you. It was fun.
Yeah.